This presentation we are dealing with the second part of the biogeochemical cycles, that is the sedimentary cycles. So what are sedimentary cycles? We've already seen while discussing about the different types of biogeochemical cycles that there are two types of cycles, gaseous cycle and sedimentary cycle, based on what are the main reservoir of the nutrients involved. So sedimentary cycles, you can see the main reservoir are soil and rocks, sedimentary rocks or any other type of rocks. Sedimentary cycles vary from one element to another, but each cycle consists fundamentally of a solution phase and a rock phase or a sediment phase. In the solution phase, weathering releases minerals from Earth's crust in the form of salts. The first cycle we are introducing under sedimentary cycle is the sulfur cycle. Sulfur cycle, when we see sulfur, the element is very important with respect to the living world. It is an essential component of proteins and amino acids. And this is another unique feature is that sulfur cycle is a sedimentary cycle which links air, water, and soil at the same time, right? And just like the nitrogen cycle, the microorganisms do have an important role in sulfur cycle. Now, sulfur exists on the earth in a number of states, like elemental sulfur, sulfides, sulfur monoxide, sulfite, sulfate, etc. Of these, three are important in nature with respect to the sulfur cycle. They are elemental sulfur, sulfides, and sulfates. Okay, I suppose it is clear. Even though sulfur exists in a number of different states, three important states which are important with respect to sulfur cycle are elemental sulfur, sulfides, and sulfates. Okay. Now, sulfur cycle exists in sulfur cycle do possess both sedimentary and gaseous phase. Sedimentary phase is one where the sulfur exists in sediments or in what do you call rocks or soil, right? While gaseous phase is where the sulfur exists in the gaseous form in the atmosphere. I hope it is clear. Okay. In sulfur cycle, sedimentary phase is a long-term phase. That is, when you go through the sulfur cycle, you can see a major portion along the major portion of the cycle, sulfur exists in sedimentary form. While in gaseous phase, it is less pronounced or it is not so distinct, obvious. Okay. Now, during the sedimentary phase, sulfur exists in inorganic and organic deposits. In what does it refer to? Inorganic deposits means where it is found in rocks and soil, right? Organic deposits means the decaying, decomposing matter. And how the sulfur trapped in the inorganic and organic deposits are actually released into the what you call to be used in the sulfur cycle. So it is released by the process of weathering and decomposition, and then it is carried to the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem in solution form so that it can be used by the what you call biotic world, okay, the plants, etc. While gaseous phase, even though it is less pronounced, but it do have a very important role with respect to the circulation at a global scale, that circulation of sulfur at a global scale. When we speak about the sedimentary phase, the phase where sulfur exists in inorganic and organic sedimentary deposits, it is restrained to a particular spot or particular ecosystem. But in gaseous phase, it can move from one to the other. It actually during the gaseous phase, sulfur gets the what do you call scope of getting circulated all around the globe, right? So this figure represents the sulfur cycle. Now, sulfur enters the atmosphere from various sources, and the most important sources, as depicted in this figure, is one, the sulfur are present in fossil fuels. Okay, so after mining of these fossil fuels from deeper layers of the soil, it is being used in various situations, and usually the combustion of these fossil fuels, it releases sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide is in gaseous form. Okay, so it is released into the atmosphere. Another source of sulfur compound is volcanic eruptions. So the volcanic eruptions and hot springs, it releases sulfur into the atmosphere in the form of sulfur dioxide and sulfate, right? And the third source of sulfur entry is the sulfur compounds released during decomposition process. So decomposition of organic matter with the help of microbes, actually it helps in release of sulfur, especially in the form of sulfate or sulfur dioxide, right? So in all these results in the entry of sulfur into the atmosphere. Now, as we have already seen, the fossil fuel combustion directly releases sulfur in the form of sulfur dioxide. Volcanic eruptions and hot springs, from hot springs also, sulfur is released in the form of sulfur dioxide. Apart from that, in the form of sulfate as well. But what happens during decomposition process? Um, the dead and decaying organic matter of plants and animals, when it is being acted upon by the microorganisms during the decomposition process, it releases hydrogen sulfide. It produces hydrogen sulfide. Okay, this hydrogen sulfide quickly oxidizes to form the gaseous sulfur dioxide, and this happens only when there is enough amount of oxygen, that is in an aerobic condition, right? Now, once these sulfur dioxide from various sources, when it reaches the what you call atmosphere, the sulfur dioxide is readily soluble in water. Okay, so during rain, during precipitation, what happens? The sulfur dioxide, it combines with water. Okay, and this forms weak sulfuric acid. And these sulfuric acid, it reaches the soil. In the soil, it becomes sulfate, H2SO4. It becomes the two ionic splits into ionic form, the sulfate. And these sulfates in the soil, it can be taken up by the plants. Really, it can be used up, absorbed by the plants through the roots. Okay, and from there it passes on to the consumers along the food chain. Now, once these plants and animals it dies off, the dead and decaying organic matter is acted upon by the microorganisms. Okay, and actually these hydrogen sulfide is released from these dead plants and animals once it is decomposed by microorganisms. Okay, these microorganisms include neurospora, aspergillus, Escherichia, Proteus, etc. The soil microorganisms which act upon the decomposing organic matter and release the sulfur compounds as H2S. Okay, so those microorganisms, a few examples are the Aspergillus, Neurospora, Escherichia, and Proteus. Okay, now these uh, we already saw that H2S, as soon as it is formed, it gets completely converted into what do you call the sulfate, and that is being done with the help of another set of microorganisms. Okay, for example, sulfur bacteria, thiobacillus. Okay, that is another example. Thiobacillus. Thiobacillus is a bacteria which a sulfur bacteria which converts H2S, or which acts upon H2S and get it converted into sulfate. Right. So sulfate is formed. This sulfate compounds can be taken up by the producers. I hope it is clear. Okay. Now, the excretion and the death of the animals carry sulfur compound in living material back to the soil and also to bottom of ponds, lakes, seas, etc., where organic material is acted upon by bacteria of the detritus food chain. While in detritus food chain, H2S is produced, as we have already seen. This H2S is being it can take up two pathways depending upon whether it is what you call aerobic or anaerobic condition. In aerobic condition, the hydrogen sulfide is oxidized to sulfate by what we saw is a sulfate bacteria. Okay, and this is taken up by the autotrophs. But what happens in anaerobic environment? In anaerobic environment, for example, where does it exist? Actually, it exists in bottom of deep lakes and all. Okay, so there what happens is it is impossible to oxidize hydrogen sulfide. And this hydrogen sulfide can take up any two of the pathways depending upon the condition. If there is enough amount of sunlight penetration, the lake, the deeper part of the lake may be containing or maybe having photosynthetic bacteria. And these photosynthetic bacteria acts upon hydrogen sulfide and converts it into either elemental sulfur or to sulfate. And this elemental sulfur can be utilized by other bacteria to form sulfates. And these sulfates, which are produced, will be there in the aquatic environment, can be taken up by the plants. It can be absorbed by the plants through their roots. Okay, but on the other hand, if nitrate is present, these elemental sulfur can still be oxidized to sulfate with the help of other molecules. Okay, so all these reactions takes place with the help of different kinds of microorganisms, and we can see that all these bacterial reactions are bidirectional. That is, it can happen in both the directions. Okay, the same bacteria can help in both the uh, reactions. Okay, so this. So here you can see the summary of sulfur cycle and how it enters the atmosphere and how it enters the biotic phase of the sulfur cycle or the food chain, and from the food chain back into the soil, how it is getting passed. Okay, so every time you can see when the this sulfur is converted into insoluble sulfur or elemental sulfur, it gets accumulated in the sediments, and that is how the sulfur cycle, it loses the sulfur, and it is why that is why it actually is referred as a sedimentary cycle. So the second cycle under sedimentary cycles, which you are supposed to study, it is the phosphorus cycle. Unlike sulfur cycle, the phosphorus cycle doesn't have gaseous phase, okay, or the atmospheric phase. Phosphorus cycle is composed mainly of the sedimentary phase. Fine, and and compared to all other biogeochemical cycles, sulfur cycle is one of the slowest cycle. The phosphorus compounds are found in sedimentary rocks, and as the rocks weather or weathering take place, uh, these phosphorus may be released as phosphates. Okay, and you can see that in nature, phosphorus is found mostly in the form of phosphates, and these phosphates slowly leaches into the water found in the soil. Okay, into the surface water and the soils. Now we can see that the volcanic ash and mineral dust all contains the phosphate sources, but they are not in the gaseous phase, right? Unlike the sulfur cycle. Now phosphate compounds in the soil, when it reaches in the soil as phosphates, when phosphorus compounds reaches the soil in the form of phosphates, it is taken up by the plants, and from there it is transferred to the consumers via the food chain, right? And when these plants and animals die off, or when the animals excrete, these phosphates may be released into the soil, and it is being acted upon by the detritivores, right? Microorganisms, right? Detritivores, and they break down these compounds and release it in the soil. Now, these phosphorus containing compounds may reach the water, and the cycle may continue. Right. So we can see that the main sources of phosphorus in the nature, they are sedimentary rocks, right? And there it is found as phosphates. Right. These rocks, when they undergo weathering or erosion, it releases phosphates, and these phosphates, it leaches into the water, and from there the plants absorb them, and is passed on to the consumers along the food chain, the grazing food chain. Okay, and during the excretion in animals and by the death and decomposition of plants and animals, the phosphate is released back to the soil. So that is a simple cycle, but it is a very slow process, and the phosphorus cycle doesn't have any gaseous phase or atmospheric phase. Okay, um, Now, when phosphorus containing compounds from the uh, whatever plants and animals or waste of marine organisms sink to the floor of the ocean, they form sedimentary layers beneath the ocean. Okay, along the sedimentary layers at the bottom of the oceans, and these sedimentary layers it remain as such for a long period of time, and it gets like removed from the cycling process for a very long period of time. Okay, now the fecal depositions of the or the bird droppings, especially of the what you call seabirds, it can develop into huge phosphate deposits. Okay, and these deposits made of the bird droppings, especially the seabird droppings, it is known as guano. And these guano deposits are actually a rich source of phosphorus, and hence they are being exported to the mainland as, and it is being it is being marketed as fertilizers. Actually, phosphorus, what is the importance of phosphorus? Yeah, phosphorus is an essential nutrient for living organisms, isn't it? It is a part of the nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, etc. And it is also a part of what you call the bones, calcium phosphate, right? And it is highly essential for the calcium, what you call marine organisms, as well as terrestrial plants and animals. And it is very essential nutrient found in many of the macromolecules of the in the living world, right? Okay, so this is the pictorial representation of phosphorus cycle. Here we can start with the phosphates in rocks and minerals. I hope you can see that towards the right side. So with this, we have completed our unit on biogeochemical cycles. So far we have seen what is biogeochemical cycle, what are the important aspects of general aspects of biogeochemical cycle, the two types of biogeochemical cycle, that is a gaseous cycle and a sedimentary cycle, what are the unique features of each cycle and what are the differences between them. And we saw two gaseous cycles and two sedimentary cycles. We completed carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, sulfur cycle, and phosphorus cycle. Okay, and all these cycles are equally important with respect to your exam, and it is seen that very what you call in most of the exams, exam papers, you can see nitrogen cycle and carbon cycle being repeatedly asked. Okay, so please learn the flowchart very clearly, and always when asked for explaining a particular cycle, whichever be that, you please supplement your answers with the flowchart or pictorial representation. Okay, so thank you.